Hey everybody! So this is an watercolor paper tutorial. Basically, there comes a time whenever you want to use watercolor, and then you splash it on the paper, and then the paper gets all wrinkly, and you hate it. So this is how to avoid that. Basically, paper is all made of interlocking fibers. They make a weave, and when you get it wet, it expands. That's what causes it to get all wobbly when you're painting. So in order to avoid that, what you gotta do is you gotta get all of the paper wet and then tape it down so that it stays that big, and then while it dries, it shrinks and it turns tight like a drum. And that way, no matter how wet you get it, it's never gonna get wobbly again. You do have to cut it off the little backing though. So anyway, over here. We have two types of watercolor paper that are very common. You're gonna find something called hot pressed paper and cold pressed paper. The difference between the two is basically just the texture of them. Usually a cold pressed paper like this one has a little bit more roughness to it. It's probably really hard to see in this video, but I promise it's true. If I feel this, it does not feel very smooth. It feels very bumpy, almost like a basketball. Meanwhile, hot pressed paper most of the time is a little bit more smooth. This one feels more like Bristol paper or like a really nice piece of laser printer paper. So for our particular today, we're going to be using this cold press paper. That's what our student who is going to be working on. But this works the same for both types. So first off, what you probably want to know is why this pad looks this way. This is a watercolor pad. Oftentimes, if you do not have time to do this stretching process, working directly on this pad is something that you can do. However, since we have lots of students who all need the paper at the same time, the pad was just one way to buy it, and that's what we did. But now we need to separate this off so that we can have more than one kid working on it at a time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop off a piece of paper from this pad. So right here, there's a little opening in my little taped off sides. And you can see that this pad of paper has got these little pieces in it. So I'm going to take this palette knife and I'm going to stick this metal palette knife right between those two. And then I'm just going to slide this along the sides like butter. So this is going to come in like so. Now, one thing you do got to keep in mind is that you are going to lose some paintable surface when you do this stretching technique. But if you don't do this stretching technique, you end up with wobbly paper. So just make sure you choose a large enough piece of paper that it's not going to cause you problems. All right. So I'm going to take that paper off. We're going to work with that. And this will get set to the side. Now, the tools that I actually need for taping this all down. I'm going to need my paper. I'm going to need a backing board of some kind. This one right here is a piece of masonite drawing board. I'm using the back of the board today because it's got a little bit of stuff on the side. Though I do suggest you do what we did and wipe this board with a bit of water. This one we grabbed first, and when we wiped it, some stuff came off. That means it's going to come off on my paper when I'm painting. I don't want that. So whatever board you get, give it a good wipe down with paper. Make sure it's nice and clean. We already did that with this one. And then that way you know that it's good to go. I did pre-cut some strips of paper tape. This is paper tape. Basically, there's a shiny side that is water-activated glue, like on the back of envelopes. And then the other side's just brown paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our piece of paper can be taped around on all sides. I'm just double checking for size here. And if it will cover all four sides, then we are good. That's as much as needs to be. So that's good. I'm going to set those aside for the moment. I will need them in a little bit. And what I'm going to do here is first I need to take the paper. So the paper needs to get wet. Some people say soak it for like a minute. I say 30 seconds is more than plenty. In fact, most of the time I would just dip it in college and like give it a little shake and whatnot, and I would have it be as wet as it needed to be. So I'm going to come over here to my sink. I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to get this paper wet. I'm going to cover the whole paper in water. I'm not trying to like squeeze all the water in or anything like that. I just want it to get it completely wet over the whole surface. Again, that weave that is making up the paper is soaking up all this water. And all of that weave is then getting really wet like a sponge. It's expanding. I want it to get as expanded as it can get. That way there's literally no way for it to expand anymore whenever I'm painting on it. It's got to be tight like a drum once it's taped down and dry again. So again, I'm getting both sides I'm not trying to like rub it in or anything, but I am trying to make sure that all of the paper does get some water on it. All right, I can see that that basically has water all over it. Good. Now it doesn't look like it's expanded much, and that's fine. It doesn't really need to look like that. But I promise you, it's expanded. I'll get that out there. All right, now I'm gonna need a sponge. So I'm gonna grab this one. It has a little bit of junk on it, but that's not really gonna matter because this is mostly where our tape is gonna go. And I'm gonna get our tape. And this glue is water activated, meaning it's not sticky at all until I put some water on it. I'm gonna lay this out here, run my sponge along it, just like I was licking an envelope. And then I can come over this way. I just want to take a little bit off the side and tape that down. I'm going to do that on all 4 sides. So sponge, sponge. Now you can measure out with pencil the exact border you want to cut off. Since I'm not too concerned about how much is still on the side, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. I can always trim it up to square a little later. Come on. One thing that I do like to do though is once I have all of my strips down, I'm going to re-dampen my sponge and go over the top just a little bit. I don't know if it's just superstition or what, but my teacher told me do it, so I did. Now, this just needs to dry, and whenever it's dry, it should be tight like a drum. You really shouldn't have much wobble to it at all. In fact, sometimes my boards would end up warped because they'd shrink so much. So we will see what this one looks like tomorrow morning, but by then it should be good to use as a watercolor paper. Bye.